Bundy's mother, Louise, says she still can't figure out what went wrong. In an interview with a Seattle television station yesterday, she expressed confusion at how a fun-loving and caring son could turn into a ruthless killer.
There's nothing in his background that can tell us what triggered all of this. In fact, up until Saturday, I didn't believe any of it.
Louise Bundy was thousands of miles away from her son when he was executed this morning. She says it would have been too painful.
It's a 3-ring circus, if not a 10-ring circus. And we didn't feel the agony we would go through by going down there would compensate for a few minutes of talking to Ted through glass. And he also felt that way too.
Mrs. Bundy always believed her son was innocent, and when he confessed to the killings before his death, she was shocked.
We were angry for a while yesterday, even this morning, that he never confided in us. Of course, if he had, what would we have done then? You don't usually go around telling your mom that you've been doing these kinds of things. That I understand, but for 13 years, he's sworn up and down, backwards and forwards, that he was innocent. And then all of a sudden, we believed him, we wanted to believe him. He's still our son, no matter what he's done, and we love him very much.
Not guilty. Meanwhile, his mama, Janice Combs, she took to social media yesterday in response to federal allegations levied against her son. Here's just a portion of the statement she released yesterday through her attorney. Quote, "It is heartbreaking to see my son judged, not for the truth, but for a narrative created out of lies. To be a witness to what seems to be like a public lynching of my son before he has had the opportunity to prove his innocence is a pain too unbearable to put into words. Not being entirely straightforward about one issue does not mean my son is guilty of the repulsive allegations and the grave charges leveled against him. My son is not the monster they have painted him to be, and he deserves the chance to tell his side. I can only pray that I am alive to see him speak his truth and be vindicated." End quote.
Details of his killing spree were revealed. His parents, Lionel and Joyce Dahmer, also found themselves caught up in the media frenzy. At that time, the public and journalists alike wondered if there was something in Jeffrey's family history that might help explain his behavior. Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested in 1991, and in 1992, he was sentenced to 16 life sentences. He was killed in prison by another inmate just 2 years later. In 1994, Jeffrey's father, Lionel, wrote about his experience in the book A Father's Story. He has since contributed to a number of shows and documentaries about his son's crimes. But what is known about Jeffrey Dahmer's mother? As Lionel Dahmer wrote in his book, he and Joyce divorced while Jeffrey was still a teenager. Joyce Dahmer, born Joyce Flint on February 7, 1936, experienced mental health challenges all her own, with prolonged periods of depression, among other serious symptoms of what was later diagnosed as postpartum psychosis. Lionel Dahmer wrote, "Joyce had gone into an acute depression. She was extremely irritable and spent much of her time in bed. Joyce was prescribed barbiturates and morphine for the condition. In the chaotic aftermath of their divorce, Jeffrey stayed with his father and stepmother, Sherry. He began drinking soon after and took the life of his first victim in 1978, less than a year after he had learned of his parents' divorce. Joyce still kept in touch with her son while he was in prison, and they spoke on a weekly basis. During a telephone interview in August 1995, she said, "When I think of what Jeff did, I stop breathing. I asked him, 'Do you still have these urges?' He said, 'Yes, Mom. I'm so glad I'm locked up. I'd be afraid what I'd do if I weren't locked up.'" The whole time, Joyce continued to contend that her son was insane. She continued, "Milwaukee turned my son into a demon. They didn't give him an insanity verdict. I do not deny that what my son did was horrible. Nobody listens. He didn't know what he was doing."
He's not a monster, he's a human being. And I think he deserves some help.
Though Jeffrey confessed to the killings, he pleaded not guilty at first, and then changed his plea to guilty by virtue of insanity, a defense strategy the jury in the case found unconvincing. In 1994, the same year her son was murdered in prison, Joyce attempted suicide in California. She was discovered unconscious but alive in her home. Joyce attempted suicide again in 1996 on Jeffrey's birthday. For the most part, Joyce kept a lower profile than her estranged husband Lionel. She turned down interview offers and never wrote a book or spoke publicly much about her experience as Jeffrey Dahmer's mother. In 2000, Joyce Dahmer, by then going by the name Joyce Flint again, died at the age of 64 from breast cancer in Fresno, California. After moving there shortly after her divorce, she worked at a retirement home and as a case manager in HIV and AIDS advocacy. Before she died, Joyce fought to have her son's brain preserved for scientific study so that, in her view, similar crimes could be avoided in the future. Lionel Dahmer disagreed. The brain was preserved for a time, and Jeffrey Dahmer's body was cremated. The brain was cremated later. According to one Dahmer defense attorney, she had to live with the idea that she was the mother of a monster, and it drove her crazy. If you or anyone you know is having suicidal thoughts, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by dialing 988 or by calling.
Hi, this is Sarah from the Keepers at Home channel, back to you with another video. So as you could see from our intro, there were 3 mothers in our case study today. And this video is about the biggest mistake that mothers make in parenting their children. All of these 3 women have something in common. Their children either had a traumatic incident, incidences of abuse or neglect from their parenting. And as a result of that, the mothers do what is called parenting out of guilt. One of the biggest mistakes that mothers can make, and it definitely has long-term negative ramifications for their children. Now you're wondering, okay, so even if you were to parent this way, your child would probably not be a parent of a serial killer, but they can develop characteristics of narcissism, manipulation, and entitlement. And let's see what these qualities were in these women and how to avoid it. First of all, they all had a traumatic incident. So Ted Bundy, his mother didn't even know who the father of her child was, Ted's father. She had him and she didn't know who the father was. So as a result, the grandfather ended up raising him, and he was very abusive to him. And this resulted in him pretty much showering him with presents. His family and friends they describe him as entitled. The next person from the video, you all know, he's been in a headline, P. Diddy. P. Diddy's father was murdered. And so as a result of that, the mother really hit her hard and affected her negatively. And he went to Catholic school. He was also allegedly a victim of abuse during his time in Catholic school. And then the last person in the video, his family, the father was there, but the father was not very present. So the times that they did spend together, doing taxidermy, he really absorbed those times and incorporated in his killings. So the second thing the mothers did is they let whatever trauma happened with their children drive their parenting. So they made mistakes, they excused them, they lavished them with gifts. They did things like that to make up for this said deficit. So that's what happens when you parent out of guilt. As a former teacher, one of the things that I found was these parents who are driven by this guilt, they will come to the school and they're very combative and argumentative. They make excuses for the child. One thing that I would caution women to do is not to make the child aware of the thing that you feel like is an impairment for them. So for example, some of the students struggle with learning disabilities. Some of their children dealt with sickness in the past, and you'll find that some children, you could tell, they had a child sickness early on as a baby. You could tell that child by their negative behaviors, because the mother is in that constant state of fear, and it continues on through their parenting. And so those type of situations are what the mothers, are driven by, or child of divorce. I've had students, one case where the child was a senior in high school, pretty much 18 years old, and she was excusing his behavior because of what he went through in elementary school. So much time has lapsed. Not to say that divorces won't affect you forever, but that child was listening to his mother, and he learned what made her, what controlled her. So you find that often these children will use that as ammunition to take advantage of the situation and, get whatever they want. So that's where the manipulative characteristics come to play, the narcissism, just focus on themselves. Okay, and so the last thing they did was kind of what I alluded to. They interfere with discipline by authorities. They will be excusing the behaviors to families, teachers, any authority figure. If they're still with the father of their child, they will prevent that father from effectively disciplining that child. So this could lead to you being in front of a judge in the future or in front of, law enforcement. You often wondered, what are these women thinking when they're crying on the pavement saying their child was an angel, he couldn't do anything? And they often bring the elementary school picture, and this is what they still have in their mind. That child, who whatever that incident was, that's the child they have frozen in their minds, and they feel they have to defend that child against every single thing that happens to them. So number one thing, if your child has gone through trauma, child of divorce or disease or anything like that, identify the source of the guilt. Work on whatever it is that is triggering that. If you could go to, Christian-based counseling, if it's therapy, something that would help remedy that situation so that you feel like you're taking proactive steps in that child's recovery. Second thing that I would advise mothers to do is maintain the same standard of discipline for your child. So if they get a warning or they get something removed or whatever you use for that discipline, maintain it. Do not make excuses for that child, because in the end, they will not value for it. In fact, they develop resentment because children thrive on structure. If you're not giving it to them, they start to resent you, they start to push you. Actually, one of the mothers in the intro, she actually abandoned her son because he had become so violent. She ran away with the younger sibling and they ran off. So that's what happens. You create a monster essentially, but yet at the end, you still hear her describe the situation as they made him into a monster. There's no accountability whatsoever. Okay, so you maintain the same standards. Also, the younger siblings could see that if that child that went through trauma is treated differently, they develop resentment and it creates horrible interfamily dynamics as well. So that was a video. I hope you tune in next time. And I hope you use these tools to better effectively parent and let go, release the mom guilt. Guilt is not something from God, and it's not going to help you or your child. Thank you for listening, and come back next time.